Welcome to the Hybrid Real Estate Professional Podcast, where we dive deep into the intersection of career, family, and finances. Learn the mindsets, tips, and strategies to help you on your personal journey to build a life of abundance and purpose for you and your family. Now here's your host, Aaron Amin. Welcome back to the Hybrid Real Estate Professional Podcast. Today I have a crazy, awesome, action-packed interview with Jack Allweil. Jack is an actuary turned full-time investor. He has an amazing story of his career. He's built up some incredible skills, also built up a portfolio of 13 rentals. He's got single family, multifamily, short-term rentals, and most recently he even started land flipping, which he will tell you all about. We dive into some unique topics that we haven't touched on in this show yet, such as infinite banking and how he used his actuary skills to build pretty cool, complex system for tracking his net worth in real time. So we're going to touch on a few awesome topics that are pretty unique, and I'm excited for you guys to hear this interview. So let's get going. All right. Welcome to the Hybrid Real Estate Professional Podcast. I am with Jack Allweil tonight. Jack and I met a few months back online, which is one of the themes you'll hear me promote quite a bit, as I've met some pretty amazing investors online. He has a great YouTube channel, and Jack had me on his show a couple months ago. And here we are, and I decided I wanted to flip the script and get to ask him some questions. He asked me some great questions, so now it's my turn. So welcome, Jack. Thanks for coming.
Thanks so much for having me, Aaron. Great to be here.
Awesome. So I would love to just first hear a bit about yourself in your own words, some of your origin story, what you're all about. Yeah, let's go for it.
Sure. So I grew up in a very small town in Michigan, about 100 miles north of Detroit. Very cold environment. But I loved math growing up, and I loved playing soccer. So it's maybe a little bit of a weird combination, but I spent a lot of time doing SAT and ACT practice, math prep books, and playing a lot of soccer. I went to University of Michigan, majored in math and econ. I found the actuarial profession by one of my fraternity brothers that happened to be an actuarial science major, and University of Michigan had an actuarial science major, and I didn't even know it really until my junior year. I took a night class on interest theory from a man that worked as an actuary during the day and then taught this class at night. And I was never good at the time, I was pretty introverted. I did not go out of my way to make conversation with the professors. And he was explaining that if you just focus on passing these exams, you'll probably do well in this profession. And at the time I was like, yeah, I need to get a job, I think, pretty soon. And he's saying I can just pass these exams, and I had been pretty good at math exams up until that point. So I was like, okay, I'll give it a shot. And so I graduated in 2011. It took me a while before I got my first actuary job. It was 2013, but I passed a couple more exams and then finally got a job. My brother had moved down south to Nashville, and when I would visit him in the winter and I was still playing a lot of soccer, I was like, wow, this is pretty nice in January playing outside. So I decided to move down south, and I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, not knowing a single soul. And I actually had a pretty rough time. This is 2015. The end of 2016, I actually lost my job. So I had trouble making friends, staying balanced, and I was honestly getting a little frustrated that I had failed some actuary exams in that period. So I got let go. I took what I called my roots trip, where I went to Europe to see where my grandparents grew up. And oddly enough, I actually met my now wife on that trip in Austria. So that was like a whirlwind of an experience. But during that trip, one thing that I thought of was, I am renting right now, and I'm lucky I have cheap rent. But what would have been better, I thought, if I had owned a house and been able to just rent it out and then travel. And then I wouldn't even have to worry about the rent. So when I got back, I started looking into some things, and I just decided as soon as I got another job, I was going to try to buy a house and rent out the rooms. And I spent a lot of time in spreadsheets. I learned a lot on Excel during my actuarial work. I love working with amortization tables and IRR and looking at all that stuff. And that's how I got into house hacking. So I guess I'll stop there for now.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, you traced, that's a very good kind of first part of your origin story, and there's a lot to unpack there. So I want to ask a question that maybe our audience is wondering. What does an actuary actually do? And it sounds like there's quite a bit of tests and potentially things that you have to continue to qualify for. Is that the case?
Yeah. So for my track, I would say right now, they might make different segments going forward, but right now you have your property and casualty actuaries and then your more life insurance type actuaries. And I decided to go the life insurance and annuity route. So there's 8 total exams when I was going through them. And it took me about 10 years to pass all of those. Now, an actuary assesses all types of risk, but the gist of it is I was making sure there was enough money in reserves to pay out insurance claims and annuity benefits. And part of my job, my last role, was a valuation actuary, and I was explaining how the reserves were changing month over month. And my sister, who's 10 years younger, used to tell people I count dead people because a lot of mortality studies.
So fascinating. And I can't think of a profession that would equip you better to be a real estate investor than someone who professionally assesses risk and essentially tries to protect the downside of your employer, presumably, right?
Yeah, that's it. That's how most people would view it. I think in the actuarial realm, most people would consider me pretty risk seeking, which is funny. But yeah, I think it's a great set of skills to have. Excel has been a wonderful tool in my life, honestly. And I will say, the biggest thing I would say that has helped me with growing my wealth has just been tracking my net worth. And I set up the amortization tables in Excel and track it. So I actually do it every 10 days. So I'll do it the 10th day of the month, the 20th day of the month, and then the end of the month. And I have certain loans that I'm either the lender on or loans that I'm borrowing from. And I see how the loans are rolling off over time. And I think it's incredibly powerful to be able to understand how much you're not only paying an interest, but receiving an interest.
So many questions I want to ask about that, but let's start with, when did you start tracking your net worth?
I think it was about 5 years ago, I'd say. And when I started doing that, and I started house hacking in 2017, and then I got another set of properties in 2018. And I think around that time is when I put everything into a spreadsheet because I wanted to know exactly how much I was paying in interest. And that actually helped determine, do I pay this loan down faster? Can I allocate my capital to another place where I think I can grow more? And yeah, it really brings that net worth, that balance sheet, into focus in everything you do.
I want to take a moment because I think people have a perception that when you focus on something like your net worth, it's a vanity metric and you're flexing or bragging when you bring it up. And I think that's not the case for people like yourself. And I don't openly post or talk about my net worth at the moment, right? But there are people within the masterminds I'm a part of where we do discuss that. And it's not meant to be a vanity metric. It's meant to be something that allows us to keep a pulse on our financial life. And that sounds to me exactly like how you were using it. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. And part of me, I think when I look at the amortization table, and I know I talk about amortization tables a lot, but I really think so after my house hack, I bought a bundle of 3 properties. And because I didn't have a track record, I got the former owner to finance those for me. And to get into that deal, to make it attractive to them, I had to pay a little higher interest. So when you see it in a spreadsheet, how much interest you're paying, and I was studying a lot too. So I could put, and this was at 6% when I think probably around 3.5%, 4%. I was like, okay, I have a steady paycheck. I'm throwing virtually all my extra stuff at this loan. And Now, when I talk about these numbers, they sound crazy, but I got all three of these houses for $60,000 and I paid them off like within 2 years. And it was because I was just thinking to myself, would I rather lock in a 6% guaranteed? And I'm studying anyway. It's not like I have extra time to go look for value add deals. And that's where my mindset's changed a little bit now since leaving my 9 to 5. Whereas now I have more time. Now I'm actually seeking out more value add deals, more like flip type deals, and just something I can be a little more engaged in and take up more of my time.
100%. And I want to say every single guest that I've had on this show so far has started with a house hack. Either one that they lived in and rented the rooms out, or one that they lived in and then moved out and eventually rented out. And I just want to highlight that because it is the best entry point into real estate in existence. There are other ways to get in, but just as far as like being able to get in with a low down payment, favorable terms, it's a creative way. You can live in the house, you can learn the inside of the house so that what issues may or may not pop up. There's just so many advantages to that. And then to your point, it sounds like you found a slamming deal with those 3 houses for $60,000. That sounds like a unicorn almost to be able to find those and be able to sell or finance them. So I'd love to hear more about that. But there is a progression, right? You start with a house hack, you get comfortable with the idea of owning property, you get comfortable with the idea of having a loan in your name, you get comfortable with the idea of understanding the different forces, financial forces at play, and then the different responsibilities that come with that. And then when you buy rentals that you're not living in, you at least you've cut your teeth a little bit, enough to be dangerous and expand from there. And then now here you are, 7-8 years later, and you're ready to look at value add and some more, what would be maybe considered advanced types of investing. Like most investors right up front aren't necessarily going to want to tackle some big value add rehab type property. So I think that's cool how your interests have grown along with your experience. So how the heck did you find 3 houses for $60,000 that you sell or finance?
So I will say, so during my house hack is when I'm surprised I hadn't learned about bigger pockets before then. But while I was doing my house hack, I really started binging the bigger pockets episodes. And there was, I wish I remembered the gentleman's name, but he was an older guy, didn't do a lot of techie things, but he had a notebook and he kept names and numbers in, and he would periodically call these people to see if they wanted to sell. And I always had this guy's story in my head, and I thought, why don't I call just property managers, because they have maybe tens, hundreds of clients maybe, and maybe they know one of their clients is looking to offload them. And that's what I did for a couple months. So I built the rapport with one property manager this is out of Saginaw, Michigan, but there were 3 different properties. They came from this one couple that was going through a divorce. And I get a lot of people that told me, like, if it's such a good deal, like, why doesn't the property manager buy them? And oddly enough, like, I've met a lot of property managers that just don't have rentals. And it does surprise me. And I would prefer property managers that do have rentals. But if he's going to lose that business and he doesn't want to own them, and I talked to him like over the course of a couple months at that point. And yeah, so these were, yes, 60. I think they originally offered 100. They wanted 100 grand. And I was in Charlotte. I never went to see these in Michigan. I never had anyone look at them. Looking back, this is like incredibly reckless in a lot of ways. Never set a foot, didn't get an inspection. And I remember saying, I'm not going to be able to go look at them. But I think at the time, the rents were about $2,000, if you can believe it, per month. And I was like, I don't know what to tell you, but like, I can make you an offer, but it's probably not going to be something you like. And then I offered the $60,000, and she said, yeah. And she wanted $20,000 down, which I actually didn't have. And I raised that money from my brother and a friend, and then financed the other 40 with former owners at 6%. And I paid off everyone within 2 years, just because I had my head down and was studying a lot. So I didn't want to think about a lot of things. So I just made extra payments.
So you went from a house hack, which is a relatively conventional route into real estate, buying those as a package as a seller finance.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, yeah. So it was two single families and then 1 3-unit. They're spread out over 3 different cities, but all within a 30-mile radius. And I just had that the same property manager that they had manage them. Now, I will say, because I didn't have an inspection, it didn't really cross my mind that the 3-unit, they wouldn't insure because of the roof on the garage. So I did immediately have it wasn't a huge roof. I think it was like $4,000. But yeah, but that was, so it'd be insured. But the former owners did not have insurance. And that like just never even would have crossed my mind that someone would have a rental without insurance. So another learning step.
Yeah, that's wild. And so what did you learn? First of all, do you still own those properties?
I do own all of those. I am thinking, and since they all are paid off, and now they're probably, I bet, around 250 for all 3. And I'm thinking of selling the 3-unit. We just did a slightly big rehab where we put in $6,000 in one of the units, and we're able to. These rents are really low. They were renting at $350, and we got the one up to $600 with this $6,000 rehab in the 1 unit. So I think it's a little bit more trouble than I like, and I think I'm going to just take the cash and do something else with it. But yeah, I as of now, I still own all this.
So this parlays perfectly into another great topic. So we all hear that you should buy and hold forever is the best thing you can do. And traditionally speaking, yeah, that is true in many senses. It's hard to swallow the tax bills when you sell. It's hard to do a 1031 exchange and find another property that's going to fit your criteria. So when is the right time to sell, in your opinion?
So I was looking at this. My thought was, because the rents hadn't gone up that much and the equity went up so much, the return on equity became so low. I would be better off buying treasuries. I would be better off selling these and buying treasuries at this point, like 5.5%. And I also started flipping land out in Arizona. And now this is not passive at all, but I've been able to like basically flip properties, buy it for $1,000, sell for $2,000, or sell for $4,000 to retail. I'm normally selling to other investors at like a wholesale price, but I've just, the velocity of the money is so much better. And now that I quit my job, I have more time to experiment in some of these other things. And I actually signed up my wife and I for an estimating rehab cost class in Georgia a couple weeks ago, where these 2 guys who have their systems down like Pat, and they have a rubric where you can walk a house 15 minutes and get basically a rehab budget, within 15 minutes. And that was the part that always, I think, hindered me. I'm always afraid. I don't really know how much stuff's going to cost, like how to plan for things going wrong. It's just so many variables. I wanted to pay someone to just show me. And yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, so much of what you've explored takes a lot of courage, right? Like you're going into these uncharted areas of real estate, land flipping, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And yeah, just rehabbing, seller finance, all these things where I think for most people, because of how unfamiliar it is, it's really hard to cross into those new realms. So what would you say, like, where did you find the courage to get that creative and get that far out of your comfort zone each time you did one of these new things?
I think it's just a motivation from thinking about what would life be if I don't do it, or if I don't explore it. And if I just stay doing what I'm doing, where will I end up and how long will it take me? And if the timeline doesn't fit what your mind wants, like, you need to find another avenue. You need to search for other things. And it might not be successful, but you need to keep trying different avenues and just constantly learning. I can't tell you how much I learned just from listening to podcasts. And then, the key is to actually put it into action.
So that's really interesting. So then how have your goals and timelines evolved over time? Because you've done things to accelerate, like you're producing more active income now, you've left your job. And presumably when you bought your first house hack, you probably didn't have any idea that you'd be doing what you're doing right now because of how many different turns and decisions you made along the way. So, like, how would you say your goals have evolved throughout this journey?
I do thinking, like, if you look back 5 years, like, you would admit that you've changed a lot. Most people would say they've changed a lot. But like when you're forecasting forward, like you always think your tastes and your likes are going to stay the same when you're projecting. And it's a bias we have. But I will say I've changed a lot in the sense I was a little bit obsessed with just cash flow, I think, and having my steady job. But now as I'm getting to a higher mark, I'm more just focused on optimize like my life holistically. Like I'm focusing more on like my health and putting my health and my relationships first. And I think just being in a happier mindset, the rest will follow. I think that's how I've changed most.
That's really interesting. There's a couple other guests who have said similar things where the further they got along, the more kind of focused they got, the more they prioritize their mental health, the more they prioritize their relationships. Of course, in my opinion, I think that's how it should be, right?
Yeah.
You put in some hard work up front, you try and learn and figure out what works for you, and you set these big ambitious goals, you start chipping away at them. But at the end of the day, what's the point if you can't figure out how to spend quality time with the people you care about? And you don't want to be losing you're compromising your health too much, mental or physical, along the way. So you mentioned that you met your wife on a trip while you were abroad. Is she from abroad?
She is. She was originally from the USR, or the former, but she grew up in Vienna, so speaks Russian, German, and she worked at the UN in Vienna. So her working language is English, so English is very good. You barely would notice she's a foreigner. But yeah, we did long distance for a long time and then had a COVID wedding. Actually, during COVID, in Austria was quite strict. So she actually was not allowed to come to America, but I was allowed to go there. Wow. So I ended up spending, I think, 5 or 6 months in Austria during lockdown. And it was strict, and we had a COVID wedding, and her family was not even allowed in the room during our wedding. It was just us, my translator, because it was in German, and the magistrate, and that was it. Very unusual wedding.
My goodness. Yeah, what a unique situation. And so you guys did long distance years overseas.
Yep. Luckily, the craziest trip I took, I went to see her for her birthday on a weekend. I don't think I would ever do that again, like going to Europe just for a weekend. But she had a lot of time off at the UN, so she was pretty good about traveling.
I did a long distance relationship for the first year and a half of my relationship with my now wife. Oh. We've been together a little over 10 years. But I thought going from Seattle to nearby Champaign, Illinois was a long distance, but I think you might have taken the edge here. So what did you guys, so I assume she moved then to Charlotte at some point?
So after we got married, she was allowed to come into America and we started the green card process. She got her green card maybe 6 months ago. She's now working, so that's good. But Austria is weird. Not weird, but their policy is they don't allow dual citizens. So if she wanted U.S. citizenship, she would have to actually give up her Austrian citizenship. But another wrinkle is, though, if we had kids, then our kids would have dual citizenship. So I think she's going to keep her Austrian citizenship and our kids will have dual.
Interesting. So adults are not allowed to seek dual citizenship, but if a child is born in the U.S. with a parent of Austrian descent, then they are dual citizens?
It sounds like that is the policy. I think they make exceptions for certain, actually, like Jews that were displaced from the Holocaust. Like I think you theoretically could get an Austrian citizenship and still have dual as an adult, but I think it's on a case-by-case basis.
Wow. And so when you said is she legally authorized to work here?
She is, yep. She's got a job in Charlotte and, living the American life.
Awesome. And so I guess you've navigated quite a few unique constraints that you wouldn't necessarily have had to by having to manage all that distance and moving back and forth and traveling all the time. So how did that change your goals as it relates to real estate? Were you guys always bought into this plan together? Was it a means to help enable this like kind of freedom of lifestyles so you could be able to travel and things like that? Like how did it influence your plan?
I would say I've gotten her more on board with the plans to travel. She does have the travel bug. She used to work for Austrian Airlines, and she's been to like Tokyo, I think, 10 times at this point. But in Austria, it's a very different mindset. The real estate or the price to buy versus rent is so extreme that it's not really on their radar to buy and rent out places. A lot of their property in the centers of the cities is rent controlled and just not very attractive to a landlord. A lot of these properties have been passed down generation to generation, and their closing costs are honestly admittedly tough. Like we're talking like 10%. When you go to buy, it's like an extra 10% of whatever that ticket price is to get a property under. But yeah, I think being long distance helped in a lot of ways. I don't like to admit it, but it probably was good for my studying. Just having time to myself to study while I was going through that. That was a very difficult time. It's very stressful. I failed many times on the upper level ones. And like I said, it took me like 10, 11 years to pass them all. But yeah, as I passed those and time started opening up and I started showing her and getting her more involved and on board, she seemed to like it a little more. And she absolutely loved the estimating rehab cost class that we took, the seminar that we took. I think she's excited.
I was going to say, it takes a certain type of person to get excited about an estimating rehab cost class. And so that bodes well for your guys building your business together for the long term. Okay, so now land flipping. For the uninitiated, what does that even mean?
So this was an idea because when my wife came to the U.S., she wasn't authorized to work. And I looked into other things. Now, this was April of 2022. So I bought my last set of rentals in the end of 2021. And then the rent ratios just went like really wonky. So then I started looking into other things we could maybe do. And I heard this guy, his name's Mark Podolsky. He goes by the Land Geek. And yeah, I suggest to check him out at least to hear him talk because he's got a great story. But the idea on the land flipping is you send letters to out-of-state owners, whatever county you're doing your research in and sending letters, you send out to out-of-state owners. You're basically offering a quarter on the retail price of what you have estimated or what you're seeing. And the goal is 3 to 5% of those people will take the deal. And once you get it under contract for a quarter of retail, you can either turn it over to a wholesaler at 50 cents on the dollar, typically, or try to sell it to retail either for cash or on a terms deal. So that's cool, like just getting monthly payments. And I have a few of those right now paying me for parcels of land in Apache County, Arizona. So it's a different thing. You don't have to worry about tenants. Don't really have to, if you're having issues with property manager or things like that, it's just different types of risks and different challenges that you'll face. But the reason I originally wanted to do the class was I was really intrigued on the processes that he had in place to send out like 30 letters a day. Like, how do you go about doing that? How do you even get a list of people that you would send them to? How do you do research on a county and basically he's built liquidity in this market for vacant land, which is really unique when you think about it. Yeah. So I guess, yeah, it's definitely different. And I definitely think people should at least check it out because it's pretty cool.
It's one of those things like we were just talking about before, right? It's so unfamiliar that it takes just a certain amount of courage to even think about it, let alone pull the trigger and actually jump in. And I'm sure obviously there was an investment financially and time and a learning curve and a degree of trust you had to have. And I'm sure obviously he has a channel and some sort of educational material to at least explain at a surface level how it works before you pay whatever the investment is. But
and now that you say that, I was trying to think like how did I even find him to begin with? And it was because just going on this podcast, there was another podcast I was a guest on. It was called the Real Freedom, like REL Freedom Podcast. And I remember once I went on that podcast, I started listening to that podcast relatively frequently. And then Mark Podolsky was on that podcast. And that's when I first heard him. And then it was probably I think I probably heard him another 3 or 4 times. And I'm like, okay. And then I looked into it, and the investment was pretty high. I think I paid like $8,000 for this class. But like when I started looking into the numbers, I'm like, okay, if I could flip maybe 3 or 4 properties, I guess I'd at least get my money back. And I was like, okay, I'm in, let's do it. And my wife had a little more time back then, so I thought it would be fun for both of us to do it together.
Very cool. And so do you have the system in motion? Are you starting to see stuff come back?
So I have made a lot more sales. The thing is, I would like the system to be a little better oiled, maybe have some more virtual assistants that help me so I'm not doing as much. I've gone through, it's definitely a different skill set, like trying to hire talent and keeping them. And so I've gone through a couple different like marketing people, and I had some people help me with due diligence on the properties when I'm first getting them. And so I definitely have a lot of work to do before it's like a well-oiled machine, but I have been getting more sales at least.
Yeah, very cool. So we've already talked about at least 4 or 5 different types of investing, but I know there's one other thing that you're pretty passionate about, which is infinite banking.
Oh, okay.
And I would love for you to explain what that concept is to this audience who may or may not know, and how that plays into your overall plan as well.
Sure. And I don't think I mentioned this, but when I started dating my wife in Austria, I thought it would be wise to learn a little bit about German Austrian culture. And I had bought, actually, I think I have it here, this book, The Shortest History of Germany. And there is a section in this book that talks about the Weimar hyperinflation. And that is really the story that got me so set on real estate. Because in the hyperinflation, they had to pay back the war reparations after World War I, and they were just printing dollars in Germany. And like it was worth nothing. Like they were using it as like wallpaper, this and that. But the people that were least affected were some of the business owners and people that owned real estate. So it seemed, and in my mind, the wealthy, what they're really doing is they're buying real assets, and then basically with the fiat monetary system, the way it is, are just banking on inflation and then refinance these real assets at higher prices. And when they refi, they're not paying any taxes. So this concept, and a lot of people talk about like the Burr method and all that jazz. And that's the attractive part, refinancing out a real asset with real cash, don't pay taxes. But in my, so that was the attractive part of real estate. And how I got into infinite banking is it's essentially the same idea. It's just a different asset. And whereas like your house, like the crediting mechanism is like that neighborhood, how well is that neighborhood doing and how much is it appreciating? And the crediting mechanism in like a whole life insurance policy, a mutual whole life insurance policy, is this crediting rate by the insurance company that is guaranteed. It is guaranteed by law. It cannot go down. And that was the part that was attractive to me, on top of not needing to go through like a bank to get financing. Because I've gone to banks for financing. I'm not a huge fan of it. It takes a while. They charge you a lot of closing costs. And I thought over time, if I can dump more money into these whole life policies, I'm basically leveraging this different type of asset to then go do what I'm already doing. Yeah, it's the same idea, just a different crediting mechanism that's more stable, and everyone's going to die. So I figure, why not? I'm healthy. At the end of the day, it is an insurance policy, so you have to go through underwriting. Depends how healthy you are, but just to give you numbers, like the past couple of years, this will be my third premium. I made my third premium payment on one policy, about to make my third premium on another policy. And those premiums combined are about $21,000 a year. And we're setting up my wife with her policy, and we're going to be dumping in $36,000 a year. So it's basically just getting more control of the money. And for an example, like I'm thinking of selling this 3-unit. So what I could do is I could take that cash, dump it into the whole life. I could then go buy a similar house, but instead of going to a bank for financing, I could just take a loan from my whole life policy, and then the financing's basically whatever I want. I could put on a 40-year loan, like in my mind, but it's on my terms. It's more flexible, and that's the attractive part. I get to just click a button and take out a loan, and that's how I've actually been doing a lot of the land flipping deals, is through my whole life policies. And I'd like to add more, but I think we're good for now.
That's really fascinating. And I think obviously it warrants more than a 5-minute explanation for someone to really wrap their head around it.
I would say if you are at all interested, there's a book here. Wait, let me get it. It is called, this is like the Bible of infinite banking. It's called Becoming Your Own Banker by R. Nelson Nash. And it's just a phenomenal book. It's a lesson in like creativity and imagination, I would say. It's how to use something that was never intended to be a banking process, and that's how he used it.
And so let's see if I have the domain knowledge to explain this at all, but just to dumb it down even one more level, right?
Sure.
Traditional term life policy, term life insurance policy would be you buy it, it has a certain number of years, and then it expires at the end of that term. There's no value at the time of expiration. It'll pay if you pass away during that time for a covered reason, but essentially that's the only value that you get out of the money that you put in, is if you die. But in a whole life insurance policy, you are also accruing a cash value. So you pay your premiums and there's a cash value that grows over time. And a whole life policy lasts until your death. It does not expire after a term unless you stop paying it. Did I get at least that part right?
If you're just interested in death benefit, and it's not like one or the other. Like I have some term life insurance also. Like you can have both. If you're just interested in a death benefit, terms definitely, you're paying very little, especially when you're younger. But for the whole life policies, it's not about the death benefit. You're really interested in how much money can I dump in as quick as possible and have access to as much of it as early on. But there's a balancing act, because on a typical whole life policy, you might not have access to any of the cash the first year or two. But if you go through a mutual life insurance company, and you really need someone, and I'm not that guy, but there are people that are specialists on setting up these policies where you have a decent amount of cash value early in the period. And that's really because the agents typically take a big commission. So when they're taking a big commission, it's taking away from the cash value you would have had in the early years. But these specialists are banking, they're going to do so many policies just on volume. They're going to make up for that, but they're giving up some of that commission on the front end.
When each one of those also has its own amortization table where and the cash value does compound over time as well, right? As it accrues interest and continue to contribute.
Yeah. So the cash value is guaranteed to grow at, I think it's an NAIC, so that the National Insurance Commissioner, like an interest rate that is prescribed. And then on top of that, you get a dividend from the whole life company. And typically what I've seen so far, obviously I haven't been doing this long, but from what I've read and analyzed, 6% is not crazy. And that was even back when the interest rates were really low. These policies were churning out. And like the whole life, like a mutual dividend, it's not like a typical like stock dividend. You can think of this as more like a return of premium, that they're saying like you've overpaid a little bit, as all you policyholders have overpaid a little. And because you're like healthier than we expected, we're going to give a little bit of your premium back to you. So that's how you can think of it.
That's awesome. This is like way more technical than we usually go on this show, but it's such a cool concept. And I want to double back to just the skills that you gained in your career that allowed you to think along these lines in a natural way, right? Like you became very familiar with things like amortization tables and financial forecasting, and just seeing how, like you said, tracking your net worth and seeing how these loans balances being paid down and property values going up, you were able to see that holistically versus just owning them and knowing, yeah, this is doing something good in the background, but I don't really know what. And so I feel like all of the things we've talked about, all the different turns you've taken, all of the different realms you've entered and the different risks you took by doing so, in some ways tie back to the fact that you learned to think about risk very early on in your life and education and your career. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to the house hack. So about a year and a half in, and this was from having the visual on a spreadsheet. Now, the house had appreciated a little bit. I think I bought it for $277. Year and a half later, it was like $323. And initially, I had just paid like 5% down. I had taken a loan for my 401k to make that. But I was still paying the private mortgage insurance. And it was actually quite a bit. So when it had appraised for $323, I was actually able to refinance, put it from a 30-year mortgage to a 15-year mortgage, and the cash flow basically remained the same with getting the PMI off. And the difference was, and this is something you do not feel, and I tell my wife this all the time, that this is something we are not like feeling because it's not cash flow related. It's like our net worth is going up much more because now instead of only paying like $600 in principal, we're paying like $1,200 a month. And that's like, that's like a game that's something that's not fully appreciated. I really like the loan pay down component of real estate for sure.
At the beginning, understandably, people are very focused on cash flow. In my view, they probably should be, right? You don't want to buy something with negative cash flow for your first property, or probably any of your properties for that matter. But at a certain point, you do have to do the math and understand that over 30 years, if you're just making whatever the original payment was, and if you bought it today at an 8% interest rate, you're paying potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars in interest. And like you said, every month when you pay whatever your mortgage payment is, let's say it's $1,500 a month, if you're only paying $250 in principal, it's not helping as much as if you were finding a way to chip away at that, or like you said, maybe take a 15-year note. And so I think it comes too with, as you go further in your journey and you have more properties and you have cash flow pooling across multiple assets, then you can start to optimize and say, okay, which of my debt is on unfavorable terms that I might be able to optimize? Which property could I maybe make additional principal payments on? Which properties should I maybe sell? Like, it becomes more of a chess match versus at the very beginning, you just got to get in the game. That's step one. There's no way around it. You can't buy your second house without buying your first house. And so I think that's like the most important step that people have to take. But then it really becomes so much fun once you get, a few and you start to see, how it plays into the bigger picture. And so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're at 13 total units now. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah. So once my wife and I got married, she actually moved in so this house that I'm in right now is the house hack. But once we got married, we did have roommates like overlap for 2 months. You can probably imagine that didn't go over too well. So the roommates are gone. And I guess on that front, maybe it would have been better to go on a 30-year, whatever. But yes, we're at 13. We have 12 long-term units in Michigan, 1 short-term in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I actually just listed, it went on the MLS like today. And that was a property got in 2021 with private funding actually from a relative. And that one had basically a 2-year balloon payment. And so coming up, the interest rate would have been like triple, and it had appreciated so much. And honestly, at the new interest rate, it wouldn't have cash flowed. It was barely breaking even. That purchase was not for cash flow. It was more like a lifestyle purchase. We wanted to diversify a little bit from Michigan, and we also could use it a little bit in the off season because it barely rents in October and November, and the ocean is still nice to go in. So we were like just in Myrtle Beach last week. That was more of a lifestyle purchase, but it has appreciated a lot, and we're I think we're going to just take the money and maybe do a flip or something.
Or stuff it in your whole life insurance policy.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then borrow it out of it again and buy something else later.
You got it, Aaron.
Awesome. So one other topic I want to touch on before we wrap up here. We met on the internet. We met on, I believe it was Twitter. And then, we've now both come on each other's shows. And I know you've had a lot of other really cool investors on your show. My show's only about a month old now, but it's such a powerful vehicle to meet people and have incredible conversations. And I just want to know, what has it meant for you to be able to have a channel, and how has that influenced the course of your investing journey too?
Yeah, it's honestly been amazing. So I've started bringing guests on the last 4 months, maybe 4 or 5 months. But like before, I was just doing videos on my own, and they weren't getting many views, not a lot of interest. My production values, probably not super professional. But I had my brother and I, during COVID, started a different podcast, unrelated. It's called the Brothers on Books podcast. We basically just read whatever we feel like. But the thing we started noticing is, like, it was actually easy to get some famous people to come on and chat with us. Because, like, we're discussing their book, we're promoting them. And I honestly can't believe some of the people we spoke with then. And I just had the thought with the personal finance stuff on YouTube, like, maybe I should just start talking to people and we'll see how it goes. And it's been amazing. I'm just learning from different people and getting different views. It's really interesting. And I consider a lot of the Twitter community like friends now, because I feel like I know you guys.
I just think it's so cool. We met in a Twitter DM, right? I think you followed me. I shot you a quick note, and then we struck up a conversation, found out how much we had in common. And then a week later, I was on your show, and a couple months later, you're here. Yep. I just think there's a lesson in that for everyone. Not that, hey, you don't need to start a YouTube channel, but that I think there's a wealth of information and generosity and other investors and people who have similar interests as you on the internet. And as bad as social media can be at times, there's plenty of good there if you know where to look for it. So I just want to end on that message, because I think this is full circle. And I will say, coming on your show was a big inspiration in helping me boot this channel up too. Cool. So I do have to thank you for that.
I appreciate that. Yeah, you were a great interview.
Awesome.
I was happy to come on yours.
That's awesome. Anything else you want my audience to know about before we wrap up?
No, you can reach out to me at Jack_Allweil on Twitter. It's ALWEIL is my last name. And look me up on YouTube.
I will drop all that in the show notes, and you should definitely check out Jack's channel. He's got some great interviews on there, a lot of information. And as we just talked about, he's easy to reach on Twitter. Give him a follow and subscribe to his channel. So, Jack, thanks so much for coming on. We will wrap it here, but I wish you all the best and hope we'll be talking again soon.
Thanks so much, Aaron. It's a pleasure.